Hey everyone, it's Zeffy and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I'll be going over the next units coming to global, and that will be Yusuke Kitagawa, Makoto Nijima, Queen, as well as Phoebe, who is our brand new navigator. Now these units are apparently, well, supposedly going to be releasing with 1.2, 1.3 and 1.4. Not necessarily respectively, we still don't really know the timing of the banners and stuff like that at the time of this recording, but just know that there will be the next 3 units coming to global. And in today's video, I'm just going to be going over what I think of them in general, and we're going over their kits as well. I won't be going over too much detail into team building, revelations, and just builds and build guides in general. I'll be doing that in a separate video closer to each one of their release dates. But overall, I just want to give you guys a feeling of the units in general and what I think that, what they do, and just give you an idea of if you feel like you want to save up and pull for those particular units. So if you did enjoy this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It definitely helps out the YouTube algorithm a lot and helps out the channel a bunch. I appreciate all the support, guys. It's been absolutely amazing to cover P5X, and I've been having a lot of fun. And don't forget to join the Gacha Rebels Discord, link in the description. We have a bunch of fun over there as well. Very, very helpful community. And then tune into live streams because, come hang out and we just basically chill, talk about whatever, and then play P5X. Alright, so you may have noticed in global, especially in your Thieves Den, that there's a certain type of character that's actually popping up, and that certain character is actually Yusuke Kitagawa. So Yusuke is confirmed to be the next limited banner on global, and basically will come after Joker. And whether or not he's going to be running with Queen, we're not too sure. I believe on other regions, Queen actually ran after Yusuke. And then Phoebe as well will be sort of the next limited unit that moves to standard eventually. So just keep an eye out for, for Phoebe. So again, today I'm just going to be going over the kits in general and just giving my thoughts and opinions on each one. So on this account, this is my Taiwan account, I actually did skip Fox. So I guess maybe you can do with that information. With Queen, I actually missed out on Queen, which is very disappointing. And I actually never got Phoebe. So first off the cab of the rank is going to be Fox. Now, Fox is an AoE Ice DPS unit who kind of relies on sort of defense and its defense scaling, and relies on defense in general, relies on shielding as well, and sort of relies on counter damage to just do a little bit more consistent damage, just because the ratios and multipliers on the ice skills or the ice space skills that Yusuke have are a little bit low to be like a DPS unit, for example. So yeah, obviously his persona is Goemon, and in general, I think he's actually a really cool unit. I think the sort of the counter play style is a little bit niche, especially with defense scaling and all that sort of stuff. But overall, I think he's a great unit. I think in general, if you actually do pull for Yusuke, you definitely won't be disappointed. He is a skip on my list, on my personal list. Again, just like I always say with any of these videos, pull for the characters you want. I know a lot of people in the Gacha Rebels definitely really like, and the community in general really like Yusuke and are going to be pulling for Yusuke. And more than likely, I may or may not get peer pressure into pulling for Yusuke as well. But Yusuke is a skip in my opinion, just because I just find him to be a little bit inconsistent, and just in his team building in general and being defense scaling is just a little bit too niche to my liking. But hey, it is what it is. So going over his skills quickly, basically his first skill is deal ice damage to all foes, and you have a chance to inflict freeze. Essentially it. You can see that the multiplier is not very good, 43% of defense. And the only reason why I believe that actually happened is because you can actually, building defense is actually quite easy in terms of like your revelation card farms and main stats and substats, compared to like, crit, for example, or just attack in general. So maybe that's probably why they lowered this. But overall, it's an okay ratio, but if you have a shit ton of defense, and then obviously when you pair with Yuki, for example, Yuki is probably the best in slot teammate for Yusuke at global. Yeah, it is what it is. Second skill, the same thing, but you actually deal ice damage to random foes. The damage multiplier is slightly higher. And if you have a shield, it actually additionally increases the skill damage by 30%, and decreases skill damage by 60% when attacking the same foe, up to a maximum of 20%. So obviously it's a random selection. And again, it's just 2 AoE sort of ice moves. They don't necessarily do a lot of damage, but with skill 2, if you do have a shield on you, and Yusuke can actually provide himself with a shield, but also Yuki can actually provide a shield as well, you just do a little bit more damage as well. Now, your third skill is, I wouldn't necessarily say bread and butter, but it is essentially the counter play style and where you will be doing most of your counters. So essentially, your counter is called inspiration, and then your upgraded counter is called imagination. Now, this is a translation here. I believe they're called something else. I do have it. I believe the proper terms of Dragon Dance, so that's your normal counter as well as your Ink Dragon's Roar. I think that's the that's what the you know, replacement of these ones, which sounds even better and sounds more epic than inspiration imagination. But essentially, your inspiration is your chance to counter, and it is not a fixed chance to counter, it is a percent chance to counter. Increases the chance to trigger counter attack to 100%. So when you use skill 3, increases the multiplier by 38.4% defense, and now is an AoE counter as well, not just a single target counter. It automatically triggers the counter skill if the if the upgraded counter doesn't actually counter, and you actually gain a shield for 2 turns. So essentially, you're not necessarily losing out by using skill 3. I know, like me personally, when I first sort of read this kit, I was like, oh, so if I don't counter, then skill 3 is kind of useless. Not necessarily, because you do still get a counter regardless, but you also get an additional shield, and then that additional shield will boost up your skill 2. And then you can also basically just become a super tank. You essentially turn your weaknesses into neutral. You gain immunity to any sort of status elements, and you also taunt all foes for 2 turns, which means that you can actually have more chance to proccing the counter. Now, its passives include when gaining a shield, your damage bonus is increased by 2.5% for 2 turns, up to 6 stacks. So again, Yuki provides a shield. Yusuke can provide a shield on himself as well. So you can see how this sort of stacks up as well. And then Artist's Intuition. We're using skills that give a shield, skill 3, increases pierce by 6%, also known as penetration, for 1 turn, which again is very, very useful. Can definitely, you know, increase Yusuke's damage, and you pretty much will always get a shield as well if you run Yusuke with Yuki, and then also if you run sort of Keen Eye. So what you're sort of looking for is definitely you want a skill 3 first for sure to lock in that counter. Basically, you know, counter is just additional instance of damage to keep Yusuke's damage consistent. And then you want to play around with these other 2 skills whenever you need to sort of hit weaknesses and stuff like that. And then if you do proc the Dragon's Roar or the upgraded counter, then you do an AoE counter as well. And again, the ratio is not too bad, but it can do quite a bit of damage, considering that if you build a crap ton of defense. Now, his highlight is basically just a crap ton of ice damage, but you also increase the chance to counter by 35%. Now, I'm not too sure what the base rate to counter is. I believe it is, I think it is like 1 in 3, I believe, to counter. Don't quote me on the numbers there, but I don't really know what the base rate is, but essentially you increase the rate to counter. And essentially more counters on Yusuke essentially means more damage, because again, with skill 1 and skill 2, they don't necessarily do that much damage. I mean, they still can do, obviously, if you build enough defense, but you're kind of relying on the counter play style a little bit, which is again why personally I feel it's a little bit clunky to play around, but it is what it is. But yeah, you get an additional chance to counter. And the thing is as well is if you proc like a counter after every single turn while you taunt on skill 3, for example, then you're going to do a lot of damage, right? But again, just like with Yui, if you don't proc those situations or proc those counters, then you are going to be missing out on a lot of damage as well. So I will go over his weapon real quickly. So his weapon is, the 5-star weapon in general. It obviously increases defense. So, defense scaling, you want as much defense on Yusuke as possible. You increase your counter damage, and you also get these stacks called, I can't remember what they're called exactly, but I think it's like stacks of Guardian or something like that. I think it's actually, hang on, I have it here. Guardian Spirit. So you get stacks of Guardian Spirit, and essentially it increases your counter damage by a certain amount, and then it stacks up to 6 times. And then once it stacks up to 6 times and you get 6 stacks, then it permanently increases your counter damage by, I think it's like 20 or 60%, depending on the forge rank. Which again, more counters, more consistent damage, and then overall Yusuke just does more damage. So his 4-star equivalent is actually still pretty decent. Still does give a lot of defense, but it also increases every time you counter, and increases your ice damage. So it definitely follows up with the procs on, for example, like. Now, actually, I forgot to mention just then as well, skill 3 actually does have a cooldown. So it does have a cooldown of 1 turn. So it's not like you can skill 3 all the time and hopefully get the procs. So your normal skill rotation would be skill 3 to hopefully get the AoE procs and everything like that, as well as to get the additional sort of shields, as well as making your weakness and taunt, and then into skill 2. So, the 4-star weapon will do wonders with that, just because if you do counter, which you're guaranteed to counter on skill 3, then you increase your ice damage by a certain percentage as well. So overall, my thoughts on Yusuke, again, a little bit clunky to play. I just feel like he's a little bit, just a tiny little bit mismatched a little bit. He's a bit clunky to play. And overall, I think in general, yeah, you need consistency on the counters in order to do damage, and that's why I'm personally going to skip him. He's not necessarily hard to build because his best in slot teammates are definitely free to play, like Yuki, for example, 100% best in slot at this point in time in global. Eventually, you do actually will get access to Cherish, who is a tank unit who's also ice as well, provides a lot of shielding, for example, which also procs and affects Yusuke's damage. So eventually, you know, that will happen. And Cherish is obviously a standard unit. Oh, sorry, not obviously, but Cherish will become a standard unit in global. So in order to, you know, build that, for example, you can have a pretty decent free-to-play team. But I just feel like it just doesn't do necessarily enough for me to warrant using premium currency on Yusuke personally. But again, I'm sure someone has absolutely been smashing it with Yusuke. You know for a fact that when Yusuke releases, all the endgame content is going to be ice-based. So you either have to let out Mont out of level 1 jail if you haven't been building Mont, or just pull for Yusuke, or hope that someone in your companion has Yusuke. All right, the next person on the list is Queen. Now, Queen... oh my god, Queen is absolutely amazing in her, basically, you know, Persona Yuana. Queen is one of my favorite characters in Persona 5, and that's why I'm pulling for her, just purely based on that. She is a single target nuke DPS. She is the only nuke DPS in the game, even on other regions, for example. So on global, her priority sort of, you know, shoots up, especially for nuke content. And again, when, you know, nuke comes out onto the endgame content, you can bet your sweet ass that Makoto Nijima is going to be your gal. So she basically relies on using her skills and using your teammate skills in order to provide elemental elements. And then when you get her elemental elements, she actually gains stacks of tenacity. And once you reach max stacks of tenacity, you can use skill 3 at max stacks to just do a shit ton of damage. She actually has a lot of high damage output. And one of her best in slot teammates is actually Vino. And Vino actually will be coming out on her banner as well. At least that's what happened on the other regions. Hopefully, you know, it's the same case on global. And then basically, you know, you just have 2 nuke DPS ladies who basically just provide a lot of sort of elements or random elements. And then once you get tenacity stacks, you do a lot of damage. So just going over her skills quickly. AoE nuke damage, 54% of attack as nuke damage to 5 random foes, prioritizing the ones that haven't been hit. Only deals 20% damage to the same target. Triggers technical if the main target has any elemental element. Again, Vino can apply those as well as your other teammates. Deals an additional hit of 19.2% attack nuke damage. And there is a 100% base chance to afflict the main target with radiation, and radiation damage taken for that target actually lasts for increases by 50% and lasts for 2 turns, and is actually counted as an elemental element. So it basically, if you use the skill again, it just procs the additional sort of technical damage as well. Now she's one of the only DPSs that actually has a heal on her in her base kit. So you can heal an ally and increase your own attack by 32%, which is actually quite a lot, until the end of the next turn, and you gain 2 stacks of tenacity, so you can build up those stacks as I said before. And then additionally gain more stacks of tenacity based on the number of elemental elements on all foes. And as tenacity, as I mentioned before, it increases your attack by 6% and defense by 2% per stack. And then her skill 3, which is the massive damage dealing skill, deals 138% base attack nuke damage to one foe, triggers technical if the target has any elemental element on them, and does an additional instance of 25% attack nuke damage. You gain 2 stacks of tenacity as well. And then under crash out, so I believe crash out is when you actually have max stacks of tenacity. Upgrade the skill to thermonuclear fury, which deals 159% attack nuke damage to one foe, and triggers technical for every single element or every single elemental element on the foe, and deals 1 additional instance of nuke damage up to 3 hits of damage. So when you get max stacks and you enter Thermonuclear Fury, or this turns into Thermonuclear Fury, you deal a higher percentage based of nuke damage, and then you also trigger a technical damage on every single elemental element. And Vino is the perfect applier for elemental element because on her skill 1, she applies a random element. Eventually, you're going to get enemies that have like 5 different elements, and then you essentially get the max value from skill 3 all the time. Now, her passives include Chief Strategist, so increases 5% for every elemental element all foes have. And I believe this is not capped, so if all enemies have a lot of elements, then this is 5% for each one. I believe it could be different though, so yeah. But anyway, passive is insane. And then Unshakable Will. At the start of battle, increases damage resistance by 2%. After entering Crash Out, each time additionally increases damage resistance as well. So she actually just busts her fucking damage resistance as well. So on Queen's highlight, you basically get 2 stacks of Frenzy Voltage, which you'll use straight away in the highlight, and immediately use them to trigger the following effect: deal 256% attack nuke damage, just a shit ton, and then spends all the Frenzy Voltage stacks to give enemies more elements until they have 2 elements, and then spends all remaining stacks to increase the skill damage by 20%, which again is absolutely insane. So you can see how and why she's absolutely insane as a single target nuke DPS. And in terms of value wise, I feel like she's just so much value just because of the amount of damage you can do. Now, in terms of overall pull value, just because she's the only single target nuke DPS, I do feel like her pull value goes up and skyrockets a little bit. But she is a little bit limited in terms of her teams because she kind of always wants Vino. Now, I can show you quickly with Vino. So for example here, last Fortuna has a 100% base chance to inflict the foe with a new random elemental ailment. There's no other, I don't believe there's any other supports on global currently that can actually do something like this. Obviously your elemental ailments, freeze, burn, winded, that sort of stuff, for example, you do require other people to do those skills, and sometimes they may not synergize with Makoto very well, or with Queen very well. But this is pretty much a guarantee to just every time you use the skill, you are guaranteed to implant an elemental element, whereas the other one are all percent chance, like burn is percent chance, shock is percent chance as well. And then winded is always when you use a wind skill, for example. But you know, in that regard, she is a little bit limited. Vino is a very great debuffer in her own right in general, so I guess it's not too bad. And again, she's a 4-star, which means that you'll probably most likely get multiple copies of Vino. So overall, I feel like Queen, compared to Yusuke especially, is just more consistent in damage. Her kit synergizes very well with pretty much any other character, and you don't necessarily need a sustain just because you do have, you know, basically sustain skill on Queen. But obviously I'll eat my words on that one just because like sometimes there's a lot of damage, you need to have a group heal, for example. But she is definitely self-sustaining as well. And overall, when you see the amount of damage that you can dish out on Thermonuclear Fury when it's upgraded at max tenacity stacks, it's absolutely insane. You actually just do a shit ton of damage, and I can't wait to actually use that and play with Queen on global. But overall, I do recommend pulling for Queen. I'm definitely pulling for Queen, and I did an oopsie and basically said that I'll pull A6 Queen as well. So we'll be testing that out when we get Queen. The next person on the list is Phoebe. Now, Phoebe is probably a really good upgrade to Okean, for example. But Okean is still very good. For example, actually, Okean is actually probably better in a nuke team, actually, just because of the elemental accuracy or ailment accuracy on skill 3. On skill 1. But basically, Phoebe is just, you know, another generic sort of attack buffing Navi. Generally, very good in all situations, and most likely will be slotting in over Okean. But again, Okean can still do work. But yeah, Phoebe is an awesome character. I feel like her synergy is probably a very interesting synergy, to say the least. I won't spoil it or anything like that. But I feel like her persona in general, it looks really cool. I don't know why, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of Ishtar from Fate. But yeah, anyway. So going over her skills quickly, again, basically just buff. So increase all out attack by 8%. When using the skill, spend 1 cocktail, which is what you get sort of as her stacks. If you have any cocktail prioritizing the higher value cocktail, spending it will increase the effect by 120, 150% respectively in terms of this damage bonus as well. So skill 2 is essentially, you know, again, another damage increase. So increase 1 ally's damage dealt. And increases max HP by 8.3% for 2 turns, which is actually pretty good. The enemy restores 2%, the target, restores 2% as HP when dealing damage for 1 turn. So again, it's like a sustain a little bit. And then you can actually spend more lower tier cocktails that you get to actually get a higher tier cocktail. And then obviously if you spend the higher tier cocktail, you get more percent increase on her skills. Skill 3. Again, essentially the same thing. So you spend all the cocktails that you have and mixes based on the main target's element. And then each cocktail spent will increase the effect by a certain amount. Respectively, increases all hours elemental damage, which is really good for 2 turns. And the main target gains 1.2 times more damage bonus. which again, it just equates to more damage. I think consistently, all her skills give a lot more damage and a lot more sort of power than someone like Okkyan, for example. But again, like it really sort of a little bit random based just because of the amount of cocktails and what cocktails you sort of get. So in her enhanced status, increases party stats by 20% of the elucidator or navigator stats, which is pretty standard. Cocktail party, after adding an ally to the team, increase that elemental damage by 2%. So very, very good for mono teams. So essentially if you have people with the same element, then you can do the additional increase of 2% for cocktail party. And then taking orders at the start of battle, randomly gain 1 mixer based on ally's element. And then yeah, your mixer is basically what you use to actually, you know, get cocktails, for example, and increase her value and skills in that regard. So overall value for Phoebe in general, I think she's a great upgrade to Okkyan, for example. Will work better in most teams. Obviously, Okkyan still has her place as well. But in general, you know, super solid, sort of very, very, you know, basic sort of attack buffing navigator, and very, very good as well. Now, she will move on to standard eventually. Now, I know there's the whole Marion debacle, whether or not she'll move out straight away. But in this case, I'm just going to assume that she'll move within 1 or 2 patches at this rate. We'll see. But basically, yep, she will move to standard. So if you don't want to necessarily guarantee her and you have already a pretty well-built Okkyan, for example, you don't necessarily need to pull using premium currency. You can wait until she gets into the pool of standard units. But overall, I do feel like she is definitely worth it. She's definitely an upgrade over Okkyan in most teams. And just having Cocktail Party in general, where you can build mono teams, for example, also sort of increases the damage dealt. And then the cocktails as well. You can always use skill 2 to increase your cocktail value. And in that case, you can actually increase the effect of the different skills that Phoebe has by a higher percentage amount, for example. That's pretty much it for today's video. So I briefly went over the kits and what my thoughts are on Yusuke, Queen, and Phoebe. I will be going over each one as like a pre-release before each person's release. So definitely subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for that. And in that regard, I'll be going through team comms, awarenesses, weapons, and should you pull on the weapon, should you pull on the character in general. And I'll also be going over revelation cards and stuff like that as well in those build guides. But overall, this is just very high level look at these characters. Yusuke for me is going to be a skip, just a little bit inconsistent. Queen for me just does a shit ton damage, nuke DPS, pretty much the only nuke DPS, so her pull value increases in that regard, and I really like Queen in general. And Phoebe for me, personally, because I already have like a pretty decent Okkyan, I'll probably not pull on Phoebe, but knowing myself, just like with Fox, you know, the little addict in me might do that. But again, just to note that she will move on to standard eventually, just like Marion. So you will have a chance of getting her on standard. So if you did enjoy this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It definitely helps out the YouTube algorithm a lot. Don't forget to join Gacha Rebels on Discord. And I'll catch you guys on the next video. Thank you very much for watching.